Hey guys, this is May, and this is clip number 5 from a series of 9 clips from my webinar, The Second Wave, It's Not Over Yet. Now in this video, we are tackling a very deep and heavy topic because as we zoom in into the United States, there have been a lot of talk about lines, cracks that have shown up in the society in the US of A. In the last few years, we've seen a few of these disturbing events, such as an election that clearly showed that the country was divided in two. And who could forget the storming of the Capitol that took place in January of 2021. And a lot of people are concerned right now, is America going to sort of split itself up with difficulties among the people? Now in this video, I'm going to show you the forecast of the next 2 years and some of the events that I think may tie in to some of those tensions that are rising between the peoples of the United States of America. Now, you will see here that I've come to the conclusion that I don't think an actual full-blown skirmish is going to show up in this year, but I would like to get the audience to pay attention to these tension periods, and then we can talk later about what you can do as a member of your community if you live in the US of A.
So even as we go into chapter 4, which is that it feels like people are so divided now, is there going to be unrest? And for this, I will go right back to where I had stopped just now earlier, into part 2 of the United States of America. Now, the important thing is that a lot of this unrest in the US, I started talking about this as early as 2020 to sort of hint that as to what was going to come. And I think a lot of people, their primary concern is always about whether the market is going to drop. And I think there are a lot of patterns in history that have shown us that there are some interesting patterns that always happen just before massive difficulties with American money. Okay, so I'm going to go through this in detail, and I would really want everyone to really pay attention to this part because this one's going to affect everybody in terms of the stability and with regard to the financial situation of the entire world. Okay, so the pattern starts as early in the early part of 2022. That again, we're going to see this concept of the ideas are spreading in the public opinion. And a lot of these ideas will trigger things like anxiety, radicalism, rebellious emotions. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating, but I think it's just at the beginning of this year, I think America had already shocked the entire world with the storming of the Capitol. And and I was quite glad that I had warned people ahead of time that a lot of these patterns are showing up already in the US, and it will intensify in the year to come. So it also means that people are starting to get themselves ready in case that there's going to be a crisis or a very intense kind of situation. You will see this ramping up from about April onwards, and then it will get very strong in about June. Now, the next pattern that I see here is of Neptune on this red color line. So let me explain something here. Now, this red line in astrology is a very sensitive one in a country's chart because this line is what we call the foundation line. It is the roots line. So for a lot of people, a foundation is like your family, it's like your home. You want to know that you are safe, you are secure in a good place. So when this planet is Neptune, and it has quite a nasty habit of making things very unclear and you are not sure anymore. So essentially, as Neptune is crossing down this line, the effect on America is that they're not going to be very sure of their security and their foundation. Now, for me, astrologically, in terms of the calculations, I have to admit to everyone that I am going to give you 2 sets of dates. Now, the reason is because Neptune comes very, very, very close to this line, but then before it crosses, it goes backwards again. So this is where I cannot decide whether it occurs when it comes very, very close or it will only occur when it finally crosses the line. So I have 2 sets of dates here. The first one begins from the 19th of May in the coming year, where if this one is accurate, you're going to start seeing America slip in its foundation as early as in about 6 months' time. But if I am incorrect with this and we have to wait until the full cross occurs, then it will only happen in the year 2023. So if you happen to be taking notes, you probably want to take down both dates. Now, what is the effect of Neptune crossing the IC is that there will be a lot of confusion among the people. And quite a lot of these people may not be thinking straight, which is why I think what was shocking for a lot of people during the storming of the Capitol is that they are not exactly your redneck farmer type person. A lot of those people were very educated. They were engineers, they were lawyers. And this is what I mean by the foundation is such that a lot of people are not necessarily making the most rational of decisions. And people will want to redefine what does it mean to be an American. And on top of that, this period also means that there's some idealism about land and property. Now, how can idealism play out? Sometimes it's just people feeling quite proud of what they have. Now, that's positive. But on the negative side is that this idealism can also lead to you should not occupy this space, or that this space originally belongs to somebody and I don't think you should be here. So when that shows up, you can find that that kind of irrationality can create a lot of problems on the ground for regular people who are not involved in the politics, right? And so this becomes strong in the middle part of 2022. But I've also written here that despite the rise, so even if I'm wrong and it doesn't really fully hit in May, it will rise, but then it will lose steam. So from August onwards, you find that the idealism sort of like, goes down a little bit, but it will rise in the second wave again in March 2023. So let's put this on the timeline. That first you have the idea spreading around April, May. And then that's around the time that if I'm correct about this black period, that you're going to start to see America start to lose its foundation. One of the worrying trends that could come out is that if you start to see people posting things online that could be, it might make you wonder if they're still thinking straight, okay? So there's one more pattern. Now, this one will be interesting in terms of the finances and the economics of the country. Because earlier, when I talked about some of the not so nice things occurring in possibly in their politics, if you expected the economy to go down, the funny thing is the part I couldn't explain is that it doesn't. In fact, it's super strong. So in fact, the labor market suddenly kickstarts. And although America had been facing an unemployment problem in the last 1 to 2 years, the unemployment disappears. Suddenly, everyone has a job and everyone's very busy, which is typically a good thing for the recovery of an economy. And this is why I want everyone to understand that just because the headlines say that, oh, unemployment is down and that people are employed, I know on the surface it looks like a happy thing, but let me finish this section and then you will understand why that makes me a little bit concerned. So from about 8 July onwards, people are busy and unemployment drops. And a lot of this new employment, this new activity could be actually very driven by a lot of disruptions to what I call country agreements and negotiations. Now, this kind of agreement and negotiation can be internal and it can be external. So that means if the US has certain maybe trade or business agreements with various other countries, and if that doesn't quite work very well, you may find that the reaction is such that, oh, now we have to do a lot of things ourselves. So that one might be a positive thing, but it can also be a part of an internal agreement problem. So if people start to feel like internally, like we're not happy with each other, and then there's a lot of stuff to do. So this becomes strong in the third quarter of the coming year. Now, on top of that, there are a few patterns here. On top of that patriotism will start to rise. Anything that is hanging out here in the number 4 house means that the average household, the average person on the ground will start to feel like they have a lot of strong beliefs. And that starts rising 8th of July. And if you find that date kind of familiar, it's because quite a lot of things happen on that date. Then a lot of people will group themselves. So there will be a lot of opinion cycles, a lot of echo chambers. And that it becomes necessary for people to show their principles and their beliefs so that other people know where they stand on certain judgments. So on the positive side, or not so positive side, is that suddenly there will be an optimism about property, land, homeland. And sometimes it's driven by patriotism that I'm going to buy land in a certain space. Now, one of the effects that I think might happen is that it might start driving the property prices. And you might see it rise. It's one of the possibilities. I'm not saying it will happen. One of the possibilities is that property prices will suddenly rise like crazy. And when a lot of people do not understand where this is coming from, they simply think that, oh, it's doing well, my property is worth more now. And I think in the air era, people need to pay a lot more attention to that phrase that my property is worth more now. It's if you understand what's happening in the financial markets, it's not always a happy thing. Okay, so then on top of that, this starts to rise even more in the middle part of the year. So for America, a lot of things are stacking up. So let's add on to that timeline. That of course the labor market will start to kickstart by about July in the midst of all that idealism. Then on top of that, the patriotism is extremely strong around this time. So can you see the stacking up is going up one after another. So at this point, I want to show you, I have already taken away all the astrology portion, but now I want you to pay a bit of attention to the astrological words. This one, in astrology terms, is called Neptune crossing the IC. This one is called Uranus entering the 6th house semi-square Venus. This one is called Jupiter sextile Uranus descendant. Now, I know this means nothing to most of you. But let me tell you something, I have seen this pattern before. And the good thing about America is that it has a long history. In fact, they are just about celebrating their 250th birthday, just about now. And I'm going to show you a pattern. Now, if you look at in 1955, this thing occurred, and that was when Uranus entered 6th house semi-square Venus, occurred in 1955 to 56. And then this one occurred, Jupiter sextile the Uranus and descendant showed up in 56. And then this one, Neptune crossing the IC, showed up in 59 to 60 in the 19th century. Now, some of you who are familiar with American history will know what happened then. So what I want you to notice is the American Civil War actually broke out in 1861 officially. But if you go and do your research, it doesn't take long. Even if you just look at Wikipedia, a lot of the action, they didn't wait until the official civil war started. A lot of little skirmishes and conflicts and various attacks and things like that, they actually started showing up even in the years leading up to the civil war. So what I'm also showing you here is that notice that the official beginning of the civil war did not happen as these things were happening. They happened after. Can you all see that? So this is already one pattern. Now, this is not the only time that these three things show up at the same time. In 1939, this occurred, Uranus enters 6th house semi-square Venus, and this occurred, Jupiter sextile Uranus descendant, and this occurred, now this one is slightly different. This is Neptune crossing the MC, not the IC. But what's interesting here is that you see an intersection, that these things were not spread out over a period of time. They happened in very short succession, and they all happened at the same time. Now, and I'm pretty sure all of you know what I'm alluding to. We're talking about the 8th of December, 1941, when the United States enters World War I and declares war on Germany. Now, the thing is, again, the war did not officially happen until after all these things played out. So can you see it's an after? And a lot of these indicators are simply the lead up to a war. So earlier when we talked about this Uranus entering 6th house, remember the English words I gave you was that the labor market kick-started. People were very busy and there was a lot of employment available. And this is why now, if I'm correct about this, and if in 2022 and you see the unemployment drops and they're very excited about what's happening in America, go do your research, find out where are these people being employed in, what kind of work are they doing, and then you will decide whether or not the things that I'm predicting here might have some merit here. Okay, so the next thing is that you notice that in 2022, it's not just intersection, they are all happening at exactly the same time. So my theory here is that much as the Civil War, the first Civil War took a very long time to ramp up over a period of years, I think this time around, the ramping up will be quite fast. And it will not take years for once the action begins, it will come fast and furious. So, but the thing is, what I see though in 2022 is that there are sparks, but there's no fire. Because as we have seen in the past, it's always the indicators happen first, the actual official beginning of the war comes after. So it is not in 2022 that that fighting occurs. But so there's this pattern here that happens in the middle of about August to October, third quarter of the year. And I call this discussions to diffuse the crisis. So the good thing is that the authority figures will step in. They don't want this fighting. They will come to terms with what they call rogue enemies. You are naughty boy and I will have a conversation with you about how we can don't fight. So this can refer to both internal or external enemies. I think those of you who are following what's happening in the US right now, when I talk about this with people, especially in my previous webinars where I mentioned this, and people are asking like, is this civil war? Is this Russians? Is it China? This pattern astrologically does not indicate whether it's internal or external. So the strong period happens in September. There are two strong periods. One is in the middle of September, and the other is in the early part of October. So what you will see in the headlines during this period is basically the negotiation talks. The good news is that the negotiation succeeds because what happens is that the fire is put out because the authorities step in. So both sides will make concessions that essentially there will be no immediate actual fighting. And it's driven because authority figures are like, please, let's just, kiss each other and be harmonious. So the strongest period is between about October to November, for about a month and a half. Okay, so that's when you'll find that a lot of the activity will kind of die down a little bit. Now, but the thing is, if you thought that this was going to be the be all and end all, the fact is, unfortunately, no. In fact, the idealism will rage on. So if you notice, the start date for this is not 2022. The idealism has started as early as April of this year. In fact, frankly, if you ask anybody, it started a long time ago already. But this idealism is going to rage on. The confused ideas and discussions, people are not going to understand why their leaders agreed to this and that, and people will continue to feel like the cracks are showing up more and more. But at the same time, during this period, there will be peace, and there will not be a lot of confrontation in general. So that means, astrologically, it means that during this period, April of this year, all the way to January 2023, you are unlikely to see real, actual conflict between the parties. And that's why I say I honestly don't think that you are going to see war, at least not from the United States this year. So this peacefulness is the strongest between late October to January of the following year. Now, I'm not done. Okay, so the thing is, I think what I'm trying to show you here is that at least in the later half of next year, there's going to be a lot of tension in the United States. And sometimes when it's so tight, all you need is, okay, so after a very long truce, sometimes what you need is a trigger. And this is where it's strong. So you see, when the 3rd of September begins, that's when, at the beginning, when the September 1st begins, I think it's when people are keeping their weapons and then they are like sort of calming themselves down. And it's only towards the end that I think that it will rise. So first, it will spark off the fight. There could be some exchanges, and the strongest period seems to be in January of 2023. Okay, so put it on the timeline. First of all, like I said, there are some discussions here. They are aware that things are not great. And then the fire is put out. So what this bar means is that actually as early as February, the authorities might actually start having a conversation already. But this pink color means that they are not fully reaching out to each other yet. There's maybe some half-hearted discussions. And it's only after things start ramping up in the middle of the year that they start getting serious about the conversation, most likely somewhere here in October. And then after that, but the idealism that was from the beginning, it will start to rage on. So even as there is no confrontation, this black portion here is when you should expect peace. And here's the thing. Now, I talked about this syndrome, this behavioral syndrome called the Trojan horse syndrome. And I first introduced it in my very first webinar in 2020, because sometimes when the situation dies down, and we saw this happen multiple times during the COVID pandemic, when first the cases go up and then the cases come down, and then everybody talks about rejoicing that, oh, this crisis is over, then we can all go back to our lives. And I think that is something that people don't want to be lulled into a false sense of security. Like, just because the authorities stepped in, you don't want to assume that, oh, means from now on everything is going to be okay. And I think that's not great, because it means that people will be caught unawares, that you just go to sleep and then and you're not paying attention. Because the truce begins from here. So from September onwards, you find that they are like all shake hands and be good to each other. And I think from about Jan onwards, that's when the transits, the listings, it doesn't look so friendly, okay, for the United States. So like I said, whether or not I'm correct about this portion, in any case, even if I'm wrong here, by about March, I think a lot of the foundations of the US is not going to be the same as the United States that we've all grown up with, the superpower that we think it is. And I'm not the only person who's saying this. Some people have reacted to various organizations saying that the United States will cease to be a superpower. Professionally, what I see from my astrological calculations is I concur and I agree with that. I don't actually see the US continuing to be the superpower that it used to be. Okay, so the question that everyone wants to know, okay, so it's all I can give you, I'm not a politician and I don't study economics. I can only tell you a professional astrologer's opinion on is it war. Now, if you were to go and actually search in 1861, those of you who are not familiar, this thing is a Confederate flag. And it shows the fight between the North and the South in the American Civil War. But today, if you go online and you look at a lot of these forums and reports, even by conventional media, there are lots of parades right now where this flag is showing up over and over again. And then there are people asking me, is it more similar to the American Civil War? Is it more similar to the anti-Nazi thing or the Nazi movement? Right now, I look at this picture, it's like, you take your pick. It seems like both are on the list also. Okay, so the thing is, some people want to ask, so is it an internal or an external war? So the American Civil War had the IC, the World War II had the MC. So it's basically an internal war or an external war. This time around, it is Neptune crossing the IC. So if there's going to be a skirmish, I think we are looking more at an internal rather than an external war, okay? And there are a few other things that I found off the internet, and I'm just sharing this with you. That in 2014, if you ask an average American, do you live in a household with a gun? And the answer used to be just about 42%, okay, which is, if you ask me, still very high, yeah? Now, that's in 2017. And in 2020 to 2021, these are the statistics, and I'm not even showing you all the states. So basically, gun sales has shot up like crazy in the last 1 year or so. So I don't have updates on this survey for this year, but I think it's quite safe to say that it's no longer 42%. So that means if the majority of households in the US have a gun, all it needs is a few irrational people to set something off. Okay, and that's why it's very important to understand that if you live or work in the United States, then you do want to make plans, because it doesn't matter whether or not you are personally involved with all this political stuff, but does it affect the people on the ground, regular aunties and uncles who are just going about their lives? It will. Okay, so the question is, then for the rest of us who you may live very, very far away from the US, so why should you care and why should you give a damn? And I'm also going to show you a few things about what I found off the internet, my own personal experience when doing my research. And I want to show you how you really must practice critical thinking when you are looking at information off anywhere, including this webinar. Now, the thing is, the USA has actually used fighting to improve the economy before. Let me show you. So these are details from back in 1930 something. This line here shows, this is around the time, 39 to 40 is when the draft occurred. So they started recruiting young men to join the army against Germany. And this second line here is when the war actually happened. Now, what I want you to look at is the unemployment rate. Can you see, like, basically, USA was not in a good place. Unemployment rate was at 19%, which means 1 in 5 people got no job. By the time they were done with this whole shebang, unemployment rate was like 2%. Look at it. And then the GDP was not doing great in 1939, and then they had a war, and oh my God, like it made a lot of people very rich, right? And on top of that, the inflation rate, okay, so this one is where it starts to bother us, because the inflation rate can soar all the way up to about 10%. At its highest at Pearl Harbor, it was about 10%. And guys, we're talking about the USD here. Okay, so you all want to pay a lot of attention to this, because will it affect businesses? Will it affect our daily lives? I think the answer is yes. Okay, so I did a lot of research, and if you look into the media, like a lot of people are talking about this. So it's hyperinflation, or is it just high inflation? So I got this off a Straits Times articles that when super inflation shows up, it's usually because either the central bank is printing massive amount of money, it could be to finance a war, or it may be as a result of productive capacity being destroyed in the fighting. Now, I want everyone to realize that right now in 2021, a lot of countries are recovering from productive capacity being down already in because of the COVID pandemic. And people are just trying to ramp themselves up back to its normal production capacity. Now, this happening in the US is going to put a spanner in the works. And that which means the production that a lot of people are expecting, the kind of recovery that you're expecting may not occur in the United States if what I'm predicting here actually comes to pass. So, and we also say that the curse of hyperinflation has only reared its ugly head when the supply of money has no natural constraints, that there is no ceiling, there is no limit to how much can be printed. And that means that the rest of the world is now potentially at the mercy of some irrational decisions. And I really cannot emphasize how, I don't care how far away from the US you are, you must pay attention to this. Okay, so I did some research. I wanted to know what then would have been the highest inflation rate that has ever happened in the US. So I went to Google and I typed highest inflation rate in US history. And this is what Google showed to me. So they gave me this article and they said, since the founding of the United States in 1776, the highest year-on-year inflation rate observed was 29.78%. And I was thinking, well, I mean, it's high. Like seriously, that's like 30% inflation is high, okay? But to say that it was like, wow, like hyperinflation, like few thousand%, well, I mean, no, right? And the thing is, I went and did even more research because I'm not really sure I believe what Google says there. And here's what I found. Now, during the American Civil War, back in the 1800s, the Confederate people had their own currency. So it was a bit like a Confederate dollar. If you look at this graph, at one point, it went up to 5,000 over percent. Okay, so at this point is when the currency died, really. And that's why the Confederate dollar doesn't exist anymore. So here's the funny thing about automated Google searches is that when you ask about the US dollar, it is true that the US dollar has never hyperinflated, but it is not true that the United States has never seen hyperinflation. It happened with the Confederate dollar. So if you what I want to draw your attention to here is in 1864, something very interesting occurred. Because usually when the inflation occurs, it goes all the way up and then it's gone case, right? But look at how effectively they were able to bring down the inflation. And in such a short time, within a year, they brought inflation down from 700% down to 53%. Okay, so I was very intrigued. It's like, okay, so what magic trick did they do? And let me tell you, please pay attention here. Now, it says here that in February of that year, the Confederate Congress decreed a currency reform. All bills greater than $5 were to be converted into bonds paying 4%. Now, the people who have been watching this right from the very start, you might recall I mentioned something very early on, something called a bail-in. Now, it sounds not exactly the same, but very similar. So that means when money loses its value, and what they do is that if you have a lot of money, then it gets converted into a bond or it gets converted into equity that pays, apparently paying you whatever percent, and you know what happened to their money after, right? So the thing is, and it says here, all bills not converted by April the 1st will be exchanged for a new issue at a ratio of 2-for-3. Okay, so the thing is, I want people to realize that if a lot of the patterns, history is repeating itself. And when you speak to professionals, I've said this in previous webinars, that when you listen to another professional of other disciplines other than astrology, talk about history, please pay attention if their history only runs for 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, and they tell you in history it has never happened. I think their history hasn't gone back far enough, right? And I tell you, history repeats itself. So one last thing I want to say is that America is celebrating its 250th birthday. And some of the patterns that we want to really pay attention to is something called a Pluto return. And the Pluto is, as I said, is the god of death. And if you ask most historians, it's quite commonly known that a lot of empires pretty much last about 250 years. And on the 250 mark, it is what we call the make it or break it. There are empires that have survived longer. So Japan has been around for a very long time, but you know the shogun disappeared, right? So the thing is, what you want to understand is that America will undergo a very massive change. So their Pluto return is between February 2022 until the 1st of November 2023. And these 2 years, the second wave of our transit from Earth to Air era will see the make it or break it for the United States. So but I have to be very honest, okay, I'm an astrologer and I can read the chart. So what I see here is themes of danger, fear, a lot of power issues. I see a lot of self-undoing, which means that it doesn't look like they're going to be invaded. It doesn't look like they're going to be attacked. All the chart tells me is the word self-undoing. And there's also a remote possibility that there could be a complete transformation, that they will find a new way to forge a new identity. Okay, but what's important for everyone to understand is that another theme that is super strong for this particular make it or break it, because it's in the number 2 house, that their transformation will come in the form of money, resources, and values. And I'd like you to do some research to know if you work for a company, if you're for whatever country, it's go and think about the effect, okay, of the USD and what it is going to mean for everybody in the world. Okay, and this will be strongest in the later half of 2023.
Now, while I understand that this is a distressing topic for a lot of people, and on top of that, there have been several established publications who are similarly not so optimistic about the situation that will rise in the US of A. But I think what's important for you as an ordinary citizen who's living and working in the United States is to understand that you can be the voice of reason and to avoid being swept up in the waves of emotion, because I think what's going to be in very short supply in the USA in the coming years is good, sound, rational logic and practical common sense. So please pay attention to what's happening in your community, and if the forecasts are correct and if you see some of these tensions rising, it's quite important to get people together and to have them see sense with each other, because there's not much sense in fighting each other. But for everyone else who lives outside of the United States, I'm aware that for many people, your top priority may be the economic influence of American difficulties on your economy. But I also want people to look beyond just the dollars and how it's going to affect things like speculations and investments, but also to understand that difficulties between people can sometimes spread into other cultures. And for that, I want to direct you to my next video where I talk about unrest in the country of India.